Hello BookTube. I am finished with my hour-long reflection video of what I read in February, so I'll try to make this video a lot shorter. This will be my video on what I'm going to read in, or what I'm currently reading in March, and what I want to read throughout March, and then we'll go from there to what just some of my plans are. So what I'm currently reading now is Aristotle's Rhetoric, and I just started this today. This is translated by Robert C. Bartlett, and I just started this version today, and I don't like it. I read the introduction and his translator's note, and he says he made this as literal as possible, which for Aristotle is just a death trap for a beginner like me. So, I mean, I've read some Aristotle before, or I've read quite a bit of Aristotle now. I've read four or five works by Aristotle. Yeah, 5. But still, the literal translations are the ones that I found were the worst. The Penguin volumes that I've read, or at least the Penguin of the Politics and the Ethics, were a lot more beginner-friendly or user-friendly in their translation. So they were going for readability over literal Greek interpretation. And this author makes it very clear that he's going for literal, extreme literal. And, well, I kind of plowed through, and I read about the first 2 chapters and did not know what was going on. I thought this book would be a lot simpler to read because I didn't think rhetoric would be, rhetoric isn't, metaphysics, it's not philosophy, or physics. So how can he make the subject of rhetoric extremely obtuse? But I was wrong. I underestimated Aristotle and the translator, and I was completely lost. So I decided that I'm going to go with the public domain translation that I have in this volume here. This is the Complete Works of Aristotle by Delphi Classics, and it's a public domain translation. I don't know off the cuff who is the translator, but let's see here. The translator is W. Rise Roberts. So that's the translator. And I actually understood some of what was going on, rereading it from the beginning in the version of Rhetoric that's in here. So that'll be the version of Rhetoric that I'll continue on with. It's fairly short work, so I hope it's not doesn't take me more than a week to get through, but with Aristotle you never really know. And the other book that I've recently started, well, I started this end of February, but I'm not sure if I'm going to continue with it. This is The Hemlock Cup by, I used to call the author Bethany Hughes, but I believe the author's got 2 T's in the name instead of an H, so what, Bettany Hughes? And it's the Hemlock Cup. It's Socrates, Athens, and the Search for the Good Life. And it's basically what it says it is. It's just, but it's not philosophical in the sense that the author is a philosopher. She says that she's a historian, so she's going to take this from a historian's route. There was a really cool image in the very beginning where she says studying Socrates is like a donut research, where you're researching everything around the subject matter, but where the subject matter should be, there's a great big hole. And that's because Socrates himself didn't write anything, and so we only know Socrates from other people, and like Plato and Xenophon and Aristophanes and a few other writers. And then so the author, Bethany Hughes, makes the clear decision to take a different approach to this author and go by a historical, kind of archaeological route, where she basically puts us in the present day of Socrates' world and try to get a sense of the world that he was born in and the world that he ended up being executed in, or at least his trial and his death. And I'm only in the very beginning of this, but she's a very good writer, very, very smart writer. and it almost does read like a novel in that sense. Very smooth writing. But my hesitation with this is that I feel like I'm past Socrates and past Plato. I don't really know if I want to read about this for another 400 pages, even though I find the author like very companionable. I just don't know if I'm in the proper space where I want to read this anymore, because I'm reading Aristotle, and I'm leaning towards reading historical works on Alexander the Great, and then also Demosthenes, which I know I butchered that Greek, but whatever. You can laugh. But I have a collection of his not dialogues, his oratory works or whatever, and I want to read that soon and whatever. So I feel like I'm just past Plato and Socrates. That I should have read this maybe last year, but now I feel like I'm just moving on. So I don't know if I want to continue with this. And the thing I was considering replacing it with is this short volume here, Daily Life of the Ancient Greeks by Robert Garland. This is a recent pickup of mine. I should have shown this during my recent book haul, but it was the one book that I had shelved and completely forgot about. So I'll show it here. I do want to read this. It's quite short, though it is bigger than your normal paperback size. It's an oversized paperback. And it's exactly what it says it is. It's a book that tries to give you an overview of daily life in ancient Greek at different time periods, and just how they saw their world and what was their world like. And a very distinctive cover there. It looks like there's going to be some kind of sacrificial slaughter, which is of course very ominous too, because it looks like the animal doesn't want to be picked up and it knows its fate from that machete. And then you see the faces of these men here and how kind of like childishly simple they look. Like they're just kind of like, especially this guy with this like tiny little grin, and it's just like an innocent like stupid grin, but he doesn't know what he's doing. So I don't know. That cover it's a very interesting cover, to say the least. I'm sure that has some kind of religious significance to it, which is why it's in the cover. But yeah, so I might pick this up instead. It depends. Maybe Bettany Hughes will grip me, and I'll just want to keep reading, which wouldn't surprise me. But still, like, I feel like I'm just beyond Plato and Socrates. So I don't know. Then the next project I want to do, which will probably take me most of March, if not all of March, and bleed into April. Last year, I tried something new for me. Something that I don't usually do, where for me, I read one book, like a novel by an author, and then I just completely drop that author. Like I read a novel, whether I love the book or I hate it. I don't end up going back to that author because I'm like, there's so many other authors I want to get to. I can't just continue reading the same author. So it's always interesting to me when I read people or watch videos on BookTube where people are like, I really love this author, so I read the next 5 books by them. And I'm just like, really? Don't you have other authors you want to get to? But for me, I'm just like, I haven't read all these other authors, so I have to read them. So I'll read one book by an author, and I'll go to another author and whatnot. But last year, I made a bit of a change. When I read Crime and Punishment, I was so enthralled by that book that I picked up Demons right after. So then I read 2 Dostoevsky books back to back, which was an interesting experience. Not a wholly good one, because I didn't end up liking Demons as much as I hoped I would. But it's something I want to try this year again, because there are certain books that I love, or at least I think I love, based off of my first reading of them a number of years ago, that I think I'll love even more on a reread. But I want to try the Dostoevsky thing and read a book of theirs that I haven't read after, because it seems silly to me to reread a novel of theirs that I loved, but have like 3 or 4 other novels by them and just have them unread sitting on my shelves. So I'll show you the 2 authors that I have in mind that I want to reread and then read a new book by them right after. Edith Wharton is the first one. I read The House of Mirth probably 4 years ago, and for me that feels like an eternity already because I was reading this when I was doing my undergrad, and so it took a lot longer to read, even though it looks fairly short. And it's the kind of book where reading it, I liked it, but it's stuck in my mind for quite some time after, and I now consider it a really good novel that I really enjoyed, but that doesn't really mirror my reading experience. It's only because of the reflecting afterwards that I consider this a really good novel. So I want to reread it. I do remember a lot of the plot points, but for me that's part of the joy of rereading, is that I don't need to focus on what happens next. I can actually bear down on this novel and see whether or not it will be a favorite. And the book that I want to read after is a book I have not read. It's The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, and this is the Broadview edition, which includes a lot of critical material, so it's not as thick as it seems. But I've heard a lot of, these are her most well-known books, so I feel like this is the natural. This book is, there we go, right here. So this is the introduction and the novel, and then some extras in the back. I doubt I'll read those extras for this volume, but at least for now, I just want to read the book, which clocks in around 340 pages, I think. That's what it. Yeah. So this will be what I read. What I want to read after, and because of a recent purchase, I showed this in my book haul, my recent book haul. I have Ethan Frome, so it feels natural because this is very short that maybe I should read this too, depending on how my reactions are to these, because Edith Wharton is a tragic writer. She writes basically tragedies, and I believe, even though these are longer, and these are usually her more famous books, this is her most tragic tale, where people think this is like a gut punch of just of tragedies. So I mean, I have it on my shelf. It's fairly short. It wouldn't take that much time to read, and it's Edith Wharton, so it's going to be interesting. It's going to be worth at least it's going to be worth my time. So I think that's what I'm going to do with Edith Wharton, and the other author I want to do that to is Virginia Woolf. I have Mrs. Dalloway. I've read Mrs. Dalloway. Again, it was a few years ago. It was more recent than Edith Wharton. But it was during the summer, but it was during a time when it wasn't very good, where I couldn't focus as much as I wanted to on this book. I had taken along with me when I went with my family and we went out camping, and that was a bad idea because my reading time is a lot less, or a lot more scarce during that time, and I'm only reading in certain intervals. So I can't just sit down and bear down on the book, and Mrs. Dalloway is a book that you really need to pay attention to, and I don't feel like I gave it as much attention as I want to, but even at that time, I felt like this book would be a book that I absolutely love if I gave it a reread. So I'm going to do that. I really want to do that now, and I have this beautiful Norton Critical Edition that I bought brand new. That I'll read it in, and the book I want to read after, that I have not read, is To the Lighthouse, also by Virginia Woolf, obviously, and this book I believe is similar in the style that it's written in. So and they're both quite short, though. With Virginia Woolf, there's an extra element that I want to add to this. Am I going to read this novel and just the novel, or do I want to read all the critical apparatus in the back? It's all there if I want to, but it depends on how my reading goes. Like, for example, this is the novel and the introduction. This is all the critical material. So if I read just the novel, it's about 137 pages. But if I read all the critical material, and they have a lot of selections from Virginia Woolf's diary too during this period. that when she was writing the novel, it balloons my reading up to 357 pages if I were to read all the extra material. But I feel like this is the type of novel where it's worth that, and the reason why I buy these critical editions is because I have that option. But so, am I gonna do like this mega study of Mrs. Dalloway, where I read the novel and then I read all the critical material and like her essay entries and whatnot? Then I read To the Lighthouse, but then I have other books that I can read adjacent to that. This is the Mrs. Dalloway Reader, which I also picked up, I think, was it early this year, in a mail haul that I didn't end up filming. This is the Mrs. Dalloway Reader, so it includes Mrs. Dalloway, but includes also selections from different essays, or many different selections. So it includes other works by Mrs. Dalloway, similar to the Norton edition, where it includes diary entries and whatnot, but it also includes other writers that are writing about Mrs. Dalloway, and I don't know if they're critical material, but they look like you got E.M. Forrester, James Wood, Catherine Mansfield, and some other writers that I don't recognize. But yeah, it's a whole table of contents. And then at the very bottom here is the novel. So you got all this. So the idea would be to read the novel and then read the critical material, and then read the critical material that begins here, and then read the novel again. So I'd be reading Virginia Woolf 3 times, or that'd be the 3rd time I read Mrs. Dalloway. But then there's also another wrench that I could throw into here. I have ordered this a while ago when I first read it. This is Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway in a critical interpretation volume, Modern Critical Interpretations, edited with an introduction by Harold Bloom. And this is just a collection of essays on Mrs. Dalloway. And it's short. Is there a table of contents? Yes, so includes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 essays, a grand total of 165 pages of just studying Mrs. Dalloway. And I have a couple of these for different works. I have one for Lord of the Rings, one for Fahrenheit 451, one for Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Usually I like to buy these if I either don't understand the work and I think that critical material will help me love the work, or I have these for works that I already love. For example, Fahrenheit 451, I already love that book, so getting critical material for that one would be just a wonderful conversation of reading a book that I love already. But then like Lord of the Rings, Mrs. Dalloway, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, I don't quite understand these books and I want to get more out of them, so I buy these. These are usually library editions or ex-library editions that I buy online, and it's impossible almost to find these out in the wild at a thrift store, so you usually have to buy these online. And there's so many of these, like Harold Bloom did many for many different works. So these are I always find these a treasure to have. So will I read through this entire thing too? Those are my questions that I'm dealing with. I know for a fact that I do want to read at least Mrs. Dalloway once and then To the Lighthouse. That is a guarantee, but whether or not I ended up going into a deeper study of Mrs. Dalloway really will depend on how my reaction is to my reread of Mrs. Dalloway. I could go more into what I want to read, but I've repeated them many times before. Like, for example, my Western Canon reading list. After Aristotle, I wanted to go into the playwrights, and I believe I'll be starting with Aeschylus, and then I'll be moving on to Euripides and Sophocles, and then Aristophanes. But that's not set in stone yet, and I might save those for April, depending on how my March goes with these novels, because I'm a fairly slow reader, so I know for a fact that Art of Rhetoric will take me at least a week, and then I have his Poetics to go after that, and that is very short. That might take me a weekend or so, give or take. And depending on how, whether I choose to read this instead of this, because if I choose to read this might take long, then, you know, that will certainly take longer, but I don't know. I'm gonna leave it open at that, because I just want to leave my options open. So that's it for my March plans. If they end up changing, I'll make a video and just talk about what I've read at the time, and just updating you about how my plans have changed, or just updating whether or not these plans go well. And then I end up doing that study of Mrs. Dalloway. I'll like to take you along with me and see how that goes. Also, yeah, let me know what you're reading and what you think of these books, and I'll see you next time, BookTube.